What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football Sports Talk Radio. I'll be your host and producer for this episode, Logan Landers. And today, we have a very special look back at history. We're talking college football history. Most importantly, we're talking about the Michigan Wolverines, as we know, national champions from last year. But we're going back in time. We're talking about a guy who played there, and we'll get to him in just a moment. First, we're going to talk about our guys on the screen here, who's going to be talking with them and who's going to be looking back at history. Of course, we're going to go first and foremost, a guy who played in the NFL for quite some time. And as you see, he's got the Michigan shirt on right now, Harper LeBel. Harper, how you doing this afternoon, sir? Pleasure to talk with you once again.
Thank you, Logan. Appreciate it, and looking forward to this. If you cannot look at the history of college football without including this university here today. They are just such a significant portion of it, and for such a long time. So I'm excited to have Mike on the show, and obviously our co-host Vincent as well. You want to introduce him, Logan? Do you want to make sure we do that?
Oh, of course. Don't you worry. I'll get right to it. Hey, Mr. Football himself, Vincent Turner. How you doing this afternoon, Vincent? Mr. Encyclopedia.
Hey, I like to say, hey, man, it's a pleasure to have, I want to say, a college football legend joining us today from the University of Michigan, Mr. Kenn. I'm very blessed, and all I can say is shout out to my hometown, the 901 and Pig Suey, the University of Arkansas, baby. Let's rock.
Sir. Yes, sir. And you guys brought him up, so we'll bring him in now, the main event here, the star of our show, Mr. Mike Kenn. How you doing this afternoon, sir? It's a pleasure to get you on the program.
I'm doing great. Other than I cut myself shaving this morning, I'm doing fine. So
it's just a battle of toughness. I see you there. Looking good though. We'll
do the interview all like this. And with you, Mike.
We'll do it in solidarity. How about that?
Yeah,
that works.
That works. Well, guys, be sure if you enjoy this episode, like, follow, share, and subscribe on Facebook and YouTube. Also, go download a podcast every single week. Now, without further ado, Harper, I will let you start things off, and whatever questions you got for Mr. Kenn, now's the time to do so.
Well, here we go, guys. Doing a background search on the University of Michigan and going back into the 1870s when they started football. Let's be honest. We're not going to go look at the 1870 team. We're not going to reflect on them. And no disrespect, but that's when it all started. And then they had national championship teams in the 2000s. They won it 4 times. In the 1900s. They won it again in 1910s. In the 1920s, they won a national championship. 2 in the 1930s and in the 40s. Oklahoma, who we featured last week, had a bunch of national championships in the 50s. And then Michigan made a change. In the late 60s, they brought in a guy named Bo Schembechler. And if he wasn't a face on the map of football in your world, he needed to be. Him and Woody Hayes had a tremendous rivalry. And we have our guest here today, Mike Kenn, who got to play in many of those. And Mike, thank you first and foremost for being here. My question to you is, when did Michigan become your love? And in the chapter of Michigan football where Mike Kenn says, here's where it all started, could you fill us in on how that began, whether it be from high school or even before that, when you developed your relationship with the university?
Well, I started playing football when I was 10 years old, 5th grade. And I had a grade school classmate of mine by the name of Roger Probilski. Really, he lived a half a block down the street from me, and really smart guy and everything. And then as we got into high school, it always kind of evolved with me playing football that I was a little bit better than everybody else on the field. And Roger Probilski, I really appreciated his, thoughts on certain matters. He says, Mike, if you really want to play football at a good, college university and you want to have the potential for a great education, you need to look at University of Michigan. So that kind of hit home with me, and that kind of, drew my focus to Michigan. If they were going to recruit me and if they were going to sign me a letter of intent, that's where I wanted to go.
6'7". You also played hockey, didn't you, Mike? You had football, and obviously you needed to play some basketball at that height. Come on.
There's not enough contact in basketball. I didn't like it. So I played hockey all the way until high school. I started skating when I was 5 years old, and then I played the other sport I played in high school was lacrosse. I played lacrosse for 4 years. So not just Jim Brown was a lacrosse player, so was Mike Kenn. So.
Yeah, how about that?
No doubt. And Mr. Kenn, let's talk about your time coming on the campus in Michigan. Let's talk about coming into your first season. Did you have nerves? Were you nervous about whenever you were going onto the team? And just how'd your freshman season go?
Well, back then, freshmen were not eligible to play. They
Yes,
didn't.
sir.
They weren't eligible to play until '75, my sophomore year, and it wouldn't have mattered anyway because I dislocated my left elbow my freshman, training camp, and I wouldn't have been able to play anyway. But the way that the scenario played out is that they took a chance on me. I didn't get a letter of intent until 6 weeks after they were actually initiated. In fact, nobody offered me a letter of intent, even though I visited multiple schools. So, my family was not of the financial means to, send me to college without a scholarship. And so my head coach, Myrnie Lazier, and the guidance counselor arranged a visit for me to go to University of Cincinnati, which, not to disparage them, but they weren't at the same level as Michigan. And I went down to a visit there, and I really hated the place. I just hated it. It was awful. And, and I came back home and told my dad, I said, and Cincinnati offered me a scholarship right then and there. And I said, well, I got to go talk to my dad. And I came back home and said, Dad, they offered me a scholarship. I said, I didn't like it there, Dad. I just would not be happy. And he said, son, don't worry about it. We'll work it out. But there were two schools that recruited me. And the first trip I took was to University of Arizona. And I loved Arizona. I was there the first time I ever got on an airplane. And it's the middle of February in Chicago. And I get off the airplane and, not to the gateway, but down the stairs. And there's two girls in halter tops with leis on and everything. It's, 85 degrees. And I had my winter coat, in my arms. They had a fabulous visit. But they didn't offer me a scholarship either. So nor did Michigan. So I said, well, I'll just probably go to junior college or do something like that. And then one day, the phone rang, and it's University of Arizona, and the individual who recruited me, said that we decided that we want to offer you a scholarship. And I go, but you got to give me your word that if you accept it, you're not going to break your word. And I went, no, not a problem. I was ecstatic because I loved it. I mean, I really did. And so he says, all right, I'm going to get on an airplane and I'm going to fly to O'Hare. When I get to O'Hare, I'll call the house and you can tell me how to get to your house. I said, okay, great. So my mom's in the kitchen. She's happy. You couldn't even call your dad because he's out in the field. There's no cell phones or anything like that. And so, great. So I'm at home, and then, I don't know, about 3 hours later, the phone rings and it's Michigan. And it's Bo. And Bo gets on the phone and says, and he never called me my first name until I left. He always called me Kenn. He says, Kenn, we want you to be a Michigan Wolverine. And I go, well, Coach, there's a problem. He goes, what do you mean? You don't want to be a Wolverine? I'm sitting here. I'm 18 years old. I just given my word, to Arizona. And I hesitated and yes, Bo, I want to be a Wolverine. Great. So end the conversation like that. And I turned to my mom and I'm like, Mom, I just broke my word. I'm upset. I said, it's just not how I was raised. So the coach comes, gets in O'Hare, gets on the phone and calls me up. So how do I get to your house? I said, well, after you guys called, Michigan called. And they offered me a scholarship and I accepted. He lays into me. I mean, just ripped me with every 4-letter word and everything like that. And then I hang up. I feel even worse. 5 minutes later, the phone rings again. It's the head coach from Arizona ripping me a new a-hole.
Oh, man.
I'm really feeling bad. So what ended up happening was this, is that the head coach of Arizona was the former defensive coordinator of Michigan. Both Michigan and Arizona were trying to sign this quarterback. And that quarterback decided to go someplace else. So like I said, this is 6 weeks after the letters of intent came out. And they said, let's give one to that Kenn kid. He's got a lot of potential because I only weighed like 218 pounds and I was 6'6", but I could run.
Yeah.
And in fact, Jerry Hanlon, the offensive line coach for Michigan, told Bo, he says, hey, you should see this kid run and wait till he grows into the size of his feet. So, so that's how I got to Michigan. I mean, and the rest is kind of history. It's taken a bit further. So couldn't be eligible your freshman year. Between my freshman year and my sophomore year, I call it the time in my age in my life where not to be crashed, but my nuts dropped. I put on 45 pounds of muscle in one summer.
Wow.
Woo!
Woo!
Over there.
And I was about 3% body fat. And so when I came back to Michigan, for fall practice, all the coaches are in the coaches meeting room there, and Bo's always at this end of the table, and I got cut off jean shorts on and a muscle shirt on, and Bo sits down there, and he always would take his glasses and go, "Ken, is that you?" I go, "Yes, coach." He says, "What have you been doing? You look great." I go, "Lifting weights, He says, "Well, welcome back. You look great." Well, Steve King was a fifth-year senior who was one of the starting tackles, and I had a really good training camp, because now I was bigger, stronger, and everything like that. I weighed like 250, which back then was ample. And Stephen King blew his knee out in the first game of the season. So after we watched the film on Sunday after the Saturday game, they came up to me and says, "Okay, Ken, you're starting next week," and the rest is history.
Wow.
I started all 3 seasons, and after that.
Okay, Mr. Kenn. When I think about Michigan, I think about the great moments in Michigan football history. And for me, it started when I was a 9-year-old. I said November 22nd, 1969. And you got to realize I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. So basically, I'm a Memphis State fan. I'm a Tennessee fan. So that Saturday, my dad said, "You know what? We got a lot of relatives that live up in Chicago, Illinois. So let's check out this game. We got this Ohio State team that last year killed USC in the Rose Bowl. They went through the season like wildfires. But Michigan got this first-year head coach, Bo Schembechler. And I sat there and watched that game on November 22nd, 1969. And I think about that Michigan team, Don Moorhead, Billy Taylor. I think about that little nose guard that was bringing that smoke, Mr. Henry Hill, about 215 pounds. And I'm trying to say, how did they beat that Ohio State team? They had Rex Kern, Jack Tatum, John Brockington, and Michigan went on and won that football game 24-12. But the memories that I take from that game was the tight end, Jim Mandich.
Yeah.
And all the Michigan fans carrying him through the crowd, and he was crying. So today, here on 100 Yards of Football, Mr. Kenn, tell us some of your great moments playing up there at that great school that got that big old 107,000 seat stadium. Tell us about some of your great moments at Michigan.
Well, probably one of the greatest games I played in was my junior year, and it was against Ohio State. But it wasn't in Ann Arbor, it was in Columbus. And we both had really good teams, and it was still to this day one of the hardest hitting games I've ever played in. You got to remember back then, college football was more run oriented than pass. So the game was tied 0-0 at half. And so we came out, and I don't remember if we received the ball coming out or what happened. But when we got the ball, we drove down and we scored. And then kicked off to Ohio State. They drove the ball for a little bit. We stopped them. They had to punt. We got the ball back. We drove down and we scored again. Same thing happened. We kicked off to them. We stopped them. They had to punt. We got the ball on maybe our 40 or 35 yard line, took the ball down and scored again. And then we went for 2 and we got it. So it was 22-0. So we kicked back off to Ohio State again. And they drive down, and we stop them again. They punt back to us. We're driving down the field again. We crossed the 50. We're on the 40-yard line, and there's like 7 minutes left in the game or something like that. And Bo calls a timeout. He goes, "First offense, you guys are done for the day." I go, "What? Done for the day?" I said, "Okay, start walking off the field." And all of a sudden, you kind of take in the ambience of the stadium. You couldn't hear a pin drop. It was dead silence. And we're right at midfield, so I go ahead and I get to the sidelines, and I turn around, and I look across the field, and there's Woody Hayes. Arms are crossed, got a scowl on his face. There's not a coach or a player within 10 yards of him. They're all away from him because he was a hard man to work for. And I went, oh boy, them guys are for a world of hurt tomorrow. We beat them 22-0. Yeah, Archie Griffin was in that game, by the way.
Bring some of the recollection back to us, some of the great players that influenced you in terms of your decision to go, as you mentioned, how you got to Michigan, and then some of the guys that you got to play with. There are several that we got to hear about, not just because of what happened on that Saturday right before Thanksgiving, but also in the bowl games and every other really great aspect that took Michigan to the next level.
Well, we were the first team in the Big Ten to play a bowl game out of conference because after, we tied Ohio State for a record in '74 when we were freshmen. At that time, we were contractually obligated to play only in the Rose Bowl. So here you got a team that's got one loss in the Big Ten season, and there's no bowl game. So then there was a controversy my sophomore year, even though, again, we were co-champions with Ohio State. We played Oklahoma down in the Orange Bowl, and that's when all three Selman brothers were there. Barry Switzer was the head coach. You had Lucius Dewey and Leroy Selman who were playing there. I can't remember the running back's name. He was a hell of a running back. And that was a really hard-hitting, game. Not a lot of scoring. I think we lost at 17-14. And then my junior year, we played USC, and actually Clay Matthews was on that team. And because we actually played against each other in high school one year, Anthony Munoz was a sophomore tackle on that team. Vince Evans was the quarterback. They had a lot of, Charles White was the running back. They had a hell of a team, but we didn't win that game either. We never did well on the West Coast. And then my senior year, we played Washington, and the quarterback was Warren Moon. And then Blair Bush, the center, who played for Washington, was the center on the thing. And Blair had a long career in the NFL, 12 or 14 years playing center, I think, for Cincinnati. But, they were great experiences. For some reason, we just didn't travel well to the West Coast. But, we used to go out there 2 weeks before Christmas. So we were out there living in a hotel for 3.5, 4 weeks before we even played the game. You just lose your edge with something like that. But the Washington game was interesting, is that they tried every trick play that could ever be tried in a football game, and they all worked. So we were down by 3 touchdowns going into the second half. And so we had a great quarterback on our team called Rick Leach, who actually played, I think, 12 or 13 years in Major League Baseball. And he was a lefty, and he had a hell of an arm. And we opened it up, and you're talking about a team. We didn't even have a drop back pass. We're down by 3 touchdowns, and we're still throwing play action.
Yeah.
We got 2 and 3 receiver routes, and that's it. So we had about 360 yards of offense in the second half, and we're just whipping, Washington's rear end. And we drive down the field in the fourth quarter, and we're about to score to go ahead and take the lead and basically have about a minute and a half left on the game, and basically we would have won. And Ricky Leach throws this little out swing pattern to Harlan Huckabee, our running back, and he catches it right on his shoulder pad up here. And the defensive back comes over like this and grabs it from him. And he's counted on the 5-yard line. He would have scored. And it ends up being a turnover, but we tackled him right away. But that was it. Game was over. We lost that game. So some good memories, bad memories, interesting.
Real quick, you mentioned Clay Matthews. I got a chance to visit with him. You played against Clay in high school. Yep. And it was a state championship game. Clay says we shouldn't have won because the weather was so bad, but we had an early field goal, and it would just rain cats and dogs the whole game.
Plus
so Mike's going to be mad.
Field.
Yeah, he said Mike's going to be furious at that. And then we played in the Rose Bowl. You just mentioned that. That was the Charlie White fumble, and he's going to be furious about that. Then we played against each other for 15, 16 years. But finally, we ended up being teammates together. What an interesting way to bring 2 fantastic players who had incredibly long careers mostly with the same organization. Yours obviously only with Atlanta, but Clay with Cleveland, and then finished the last 2 or 3 years of his career in Atlanta. But he is a well-wisher as well. Even though he's not a Michigan fan, he is definitely a Mike Kenn fan.
Well, I'm a fan of Clay's too. He's a great guy. He was a great player. I will say this: he knows this. He never got a sack on me, so
Gotta throw that out there.
Yeah.
Oh,
all right.
yeah, it's all good. But let's talk about one of the more historic rivalries in college football, one that you've played in multiple times, and that's the battle for the Little Brown Jug. Let's talk about your battles with the Minnesota Golden Gophers and against that hotshot quarterback that everyone knows is that head coach in Tony Dungy. What was it like playing against Tony?
You know what? Back in the 70s when I played at Michigan, it was really two teams and everybody else. It was Michigan and Ohio State and then everybody else. It's just the way it was. And it's kind of that way again now, unfortunately. Wisconsin was up there for a while. Michigan State's terrible. But our primary rivalry, obviously, was Ohio State. The second most big rivalry was with Michigan State. In fact, my teammates, I asked them if there was one game that you had to lose, Ohio State or Michigan State, and these are my teammates who actually were from the state of Michigan, said, which one would you rather lose, Michigan State or Ohio State? They'd rather lose Ohio State rather than lose to Michigan State because hometown rivalry or home state rivalry.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know Tony back then really other than him as a player, you know, until after our careers went into the NFL and then he got into coaching and everything like that. You know, I grew up in Evanston, which was the home of Northwestern University, and I think we beat them 78-0 one year. I mean, they were, you know, they just couldn't get the kids because their academic standards were higher there. You know, you had Purdue, you had Indiana. Funny story about Indiana is that Lou Holtz was the coach of Indiana, and we're playing down in Indiana. And so we go out for pregame warm-up. The Indiana team, you know, never comes out. You know, really. So then we go in the locker, we come out, you know, for the kickoff, and the Indiana team is still not on the field. And they got a big, huge entrance to a tunnel in the corner of the end zone. And all of a sudden, this English double-decker bus comes out, and it's got all the Indiana players on top of it, and the fans are going nuts and everything like that because, you know, the head coach, well, it wasn't Lou Holtz, it was
Lee Corso.
Lee Corso. Yeah, Lee Corso. So you got to give Lee credit for he knew they couldn't beat us. He's trying to get everybody fired up. Yeah, we tore him a new rear end. I mean, it was laughable, though. I mean, you got to give him credit trying to do something different. But so, like I said, back then it was Michigan, Ohio State. Everybody else was, you know, but we had an upset. One year we got upset by Purdue when Scott Durkin was the running back for them, who was a hell of a running back and played for the Jets for a number of years. But everybody else, Wisconsin, the only thing about playing in Wisconsin is that all those fans were always drunk. And we had to keep our helmet on all the time, whether we're on the field or not, because they're throwing stuff at us all the time. Apples, empty beer cans, things like that. So that was the challenge when you had to play, you know, up in Wisconsin.
I'm going to say this. I can see why a lot of teams didn't like Michigan back then in the Big Ten because y'all had a real prolific rushing attack. I'm looking at the 75 season, Mr. Kenn. Y'all had 3,840 yards rushing, 320 yards a game. Then in 76, y'all had 4,144 yards rushing and 345 yards a game. Then in 77, y'all had almost 3,000 yards on the season. Y'all averaged 260 yards a game. Where I come from, we said the offensive line is handling their business. They taking it to another level. Old school, I control you. So I'm going to ask you this right here, Mr. Kenn. What was it like blocking for the running backs like the likes of Russell Davis, Rob Lytle, Harlan Huckabee, and Gordon Bell, right quick here on 100 yards of football?
Yeah,
What was
Gordon
it like?
Gordon Bell and Rob Lytle were early, like my sophomore year, and then Harlan and Huckabee and Russell Davis. A lot of people don't realize this is that Bo Schembechler was actually an offensive lineman. Okay.
Okay.
And then the offensive line coach at Michigan then, came there in 1969 was Jerry Handel, the same offensive line coach that Dan Dierdorf had. Okay. And the foundation of the fundamentals and techniques that I learned from Jerry Hanlon and then took it to another level in the NFL was all from Jerry Hanlon. And nobody knew how to teach offensive line techniques and fundamentals than anybody better than Jerry Hanlon. So, we ran an I option, okay, and so our offensive lines were good. We had on my junior senior year, we had 3 All-Americans on the offensive line. I wasn't one of them, by the way. In fact, Mark Donahue, another Chicago kid, was a top 10 finalist for the Heisman as an offensive guard. But we always had. Bo knew and Hanlon knew is that you win the football game at the line of scrimmage, and you can't win the football game at the line of scrimmage unless you got offensive linemen that can do that. And it was great learning from him. And then obviously the NFL game is a lot more wide open than what we were playing with at the collegiate level. And we were running the ball 75% of the time. We were averaging maybe 15 passing plays a game. And then in the NFL, it was still a little more run oriented, maybe 65% of in the early years was run, and now it's 75-80% pass. The game has just changed. Even though Harper and I's former team, the Falcons, they like to play a little bit more, at least the previous coaching staff liked to play more ball control. That's because they had poor defense, so.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You don't want to give them the ball back.
Mike, it's interesting that you bring up the coaches, and Bo obviously had a great staff, and they were all very loyal to the program. But what I wanted to bring up was your ability, and this is kind of the transition into another reason why a recruit would want to go there. The coaching staff would teach, like you said, a style, and you're really good at running the ball. Well, there isn't a pro team that wouldn't want that. And so you're learning to play the game at the pro level, even though you're still in college. And that translates to me in that if I'm a coach or a recruit or even just in the scouting department for any pro team, I'm going to look at what Michigan's doing, because I'm going to find a kid or 2 or 3 that I can draft that can play at that level. True enough, right? We all agree on that. It's not hard to find the talent. How do you think that helped in the recruiting? Because if you look at the quarterback position, after you were gone, I want to say 88, 90, Michigan started doing things differently from a quarterback position. You had Harbaugh in the NFL. You had Elvis Grbac. You had Brian Griese, Chad Henne. And then later on, some kid named Brady, I think his name is. Your ability to put top athletes at the pro level after learning how to play at Michigan, what did that mean to you?
Well, it all started in '69 when, Michigan upset Ohio State. And that was the foundation of the building block to basically, hey, there's a new sheriff in town. If you want to play championship football, come to Michigan. And year after year after year. We were either outright Big Ten champions 2 out of the 4 years we were co-champions, 2 out of my 4 years. So if you want to play Big Ten football and you want to be, Big Ten champions, your best chance was to come to Michigan because, I was there in the middle of the 10-year war between Bo and Woody, and I think that we were on the winning edge of that 10-year rivalry right there. But, and the other thing about Michigan too is that, it's a phenomenal school academically. It's always ranked in the top five as the public universities from an academic standpoint. So you get the best of both worlds. You had a great football environment, the best environment to elevate your skills for the possibility of taking it to the next level, but you can also get a great education at the same time. Because Harper, you guys know as I know, there's like 5,500 players available every year for the draft. And there's only now, back when we were playing, it was 12 rounds. There's only like 340 that are drafted. And after the first year, half of them are gone. Mm-hmm. And then in the year 3, half of the other half are gone. I mean, now the average career in the NFL is less than 3 years.
You mentioned that real quick, Mike, and Logan, please forgive me. When you first went onto that campus, it is massive. The footprint, you've got the Huron River kind of breaking the north end of the campus away from the other, but you don't need just a car. You almost need to have a helicopter to get from one side of the campus to the other.
Harper, no, it's not. Actually, the main campus is one of the most condensed campuses you've ever been on. Now, it's got a north campus, too, which was, had the School of Arts and stuff like that, everything. But the main campus is really a small footprint. So at West Quad Dorm, where we always had to stay when we were freshmen and sophomore, I could be at any class, whether it was an engineering class, med school, didn't really matter, speech class, even go to law school, I could walk there in 5 minutes. It's actually a very condensed main campus there in the middle of Ann Arbor. Even though there's 37,000 people there, but there's actually more graduate students at Michigan than there are undergraduate students.
Yeah, just an amazing, the school, when you mentioned that, I had to interrupt and just go, that is one of the most impressive things. Like you said, top 5 in everything. There's 250 different degrees that you can earn at that school, if not more. If you wanted to get your underwater basket weaving, you could do it. It probably
it's out there.
Not that you would have anything to do with that, but in the recruiting process, I imagine that has to be an added bonus, that the school speaks for itself. You want to come here? Shame on you if you can't find anything to study while you're here at Michigan, because we've got just about everything your heart could desire.
Well, back, in my era, you had 30 scholarships a year. What do you have now? 20?
22 or 3, depending on how many you have already expended. Yeah,
we were giving out 30 a year. So when I was a junior and a senior, well, more so as a junior, because after my senior season, I still did as a senior, is that we were the chaperones for the potential new Wolverines, so we had to show them around campus, both good and bad. So there's a lot of stories that I can't talk about here about that.
Yes, sir. And Mike, let's talk about your senior season in Michigan, 1977. A lot of big changes, as we know. Defensive coordinator out with Bill McCartney coming on in to take over. So what was that like in the locker room? So losing guys from last year, going out of the draft, and just kind of getting a whole new regime in a sense.
Gary Moeller was our defensive coordinator the entire time I was there. Okay, Bill McCartney was not. Okay. So we didn't have any change in coaching personnel the entire time I was there. McCartney came after me. So I don't know when that was. When Gary Moeller had that incident leaving the bar in Michigan one day is when he was terminated, and then when McCartney came in as the defensive coordinator. So I was never with him there. Here's the interesting thing, though, is that one of the coaches on that team was Jack Harbaugh, who was our defensive back coach, who was Jim and John's dad. And Jim and John, they were our ball boys.
Look at that.
And then Jim, the last half of my NFL career was the first half of his NFL career. So we know each other, but really they were our ball boys. But our staff never changed the entire 4 years I was there.
And they've made a heck of a career for themselves, sure.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Kenn, I have a good friend of mine that lives here locally in the Atlanta metro area. He's from Detroit, diehard Michigan fan. And when y'all won the national championship, I had to hear his mouth for about almost 3 months. But he wanted me to ask you today, because he knew you was going to be a guest on our show today. He wanted me to ask you, what was the battles like going up against Andre Jackson out of Iowa, Aaron Brown out of Ohio State, Larry Bethea out of Michigan State? He wanted to know, what was them battles like, and was it a lot of trash talking, and were y'all down in that grind just pounding on each other all day? And Scott Stutwell from Illinois. He really want me to bring that name up.
Yeah, Larry Bethea ended up playing for the Cowboys for quite a bit of time. I played against him when he was there too. A lot of people ask me that, and Harper knows this. There's too much communication amongst the offensive linemen to talk trash, because you go up there and you got a set front. Then that set front moves, and so that changes responsibilities, and you got to convey that, to the other offensive line, because what we thought we were going to block, the blocking scheme was on this play, just change. Then they can shift again. You might not even have time to go ahead and change the call. Then you had to eyeball it and make the adjustment, on the fly. So there's not that much. Now, the defense is completely different. They get to talk crap all the time, but, you're too busy, paying attention to your teammates to make sure we're all on the same page. I played against, at Michigan, I played against some great players. In the NFL, I played against a lot of great players, but, it was just a joy there. And, my parents loved, they tailgated. They came to every game, every away game, and tailgated every time. And it was, I have more fond memories of playing at Michigan than I do in the NFL, because the team didn't change. The environment didn't change. The outcomes for us did not change. They were always successful.
Yeah.
And, you develop, friends for life under that situation. I played with, I don't want to say I played, there's a lot of players in the NFL who played with me. Because
Yes,
I was still there when they were gone, and the other ones came in, and then they would be gone, and I was still there. So college is different. The NFL is a business, and kind of call college business now with nil to what they're getting paid. I mean, there's players who got drafted in the NFL this year are taking a pay cut because they're making more money with the nil money.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mike, talk a little bit about the aftermath. When you're done, you had nearly 2 decades where you could not go back to the campus and go to a game, but then eventually you did. What would it mean to you as a young freshman or sophomore when some of the older guys would come in? Bo might bring somebody back, and then now that you have a chance to do that as a seasoned veteran guy, speaks for itself. Your resume does. And you get to go back and not only see your buddies, but maybe be someone who could say, hey, guys, if you work hard, you can make some amazing things happen in your life. And the group of Michigan guys that have these special bonds with one another. What is that like for you?
Oh, it's great. In fact, there's a reunion next weekend for the 74 team, but I got a conflict, so I can't go. But technically, we were on that team, but we weren't eligible to play. But before COVID, I was going up to one Michigan game a year. And we've had maybe with my class at least 3, if not 4 reunions. There was a reunion we had, I only remember the year now, 125 years of Michigan football. And I was up there for that. You're on the field. It's great. It's a bunch of old war stories and everything. So I got pictures of it, and I always look forward to going. In fact, this will be the first year since COVID that I'll actually go back to a game. I got teammates that still live there. My other offensive tackle, Bill Dufek, still lives there. I got my own room down in his basement, so I don't need a hotel. I get first dibs on that.
There you go.
Going on. But it's just great to go there and visit with your buddies and reminisce.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And speaking of your old buddies, talk about some of the guys you shared all those battles with Donahue and Zarza and Downing, and just the camaraderie that y'all had going out there every Saturday and just battling.
Well, you know what? The cliques that are developed in football are position oriented. You have team meetings, but then you break down into your position meetings. So you're spending more time with your positions than you are with anything else. And so, you build a bond there because it's a personal affinity of exactly what your roles and responsibilities are in regards to, helping the team win. And I would think that that's the same whether, even sometimes tight ends would come into those meetings. And, whether it's linebackers or D-line or DBs or wide receivers, the only ones that are a little more isolated is that usually you got 3 quarterbacks and there weren't many, that's all they had in that room. As far as I'm concerned, the hardest position to play in football is offensive line. People don't know how technically difficult it is. In fact, it really frustrates me now watching the game, especially at the NFL level. Nobody in the NFL is teaching how to pass block and run block correctly in the NFL anymore. They're just not. It's just hard to watch, and I could help them and make it easier for them to accomplish their job. But I mean, it's really hard to watch. But a lot of great friends. In fact, I just talked to Billy Dufek last week and told him that I was have to cancel. I couldn't make the alumni thing. So.
Okay, you being a Michigan man, I'm gonna go back 2 history moments here. How proud were you when Charles Woodson won the Heisman Trophy over a young man from my state of Tennessee, Peyton Manning? And then how proud was you this year finally seeing the Blue win it down in Houston, Texas, and win the national championship? Be honest now. I know you was.
Well, what Charles Woodson is, you got to remember, he was prior to Deion Sanders playing both ways. Charles was playing both ways, plus he was returning punts. He was a remarkable athlete and had a remarkable NFL career. And then, I was ecstatic when Harbaugh actually won the national championship because, Bo never won one. Now, Lloyd Carr won a national championship, but he won it with Gary Muller's players. But there was a long dry spell. And you know what? We beat a hell of a team for the national championship this year. And I was, to be honest with you, I didn't think we were going to hold up, because, the SEC has been kind of dominating college football for a while now. They play by a different set of rules. And they get athletes. But, we pulled it off and, was ecstatic. Hopefully, and I like the new hire because, he was already part of the staff. He actually coached, 5 games that he had to go ahead and actually be the interim head coach, and they won those. So, from a continuity standpoint, it's going to help in recruiting is that, Harbaugh might be gone, but the same Michigan is here with the standards, the same experience, and everything. Just because Harbaugh's gone doesn't mean you can't have, the same experience. And so I'm cautiously optimistic for that. And I don't follow the recruiting that much because all the pundits really don't know what they're talking about. It's a 4-star, 3-star, 5-star.
Yes, sir.
All right, real quick, Mike, just a couple shorties for you. Best stadium that you ever played in and why?
College?
Yep.
I got to say, it would have to be Ohio State, just because of the rivalry and the energy in the stands, because those people hate Michigan. So that was a real electric stadium to play in. It's just like when Ohio State, if you ask the Ohio State player, they would probably say Michigan Stadium, I would think.
Yeah, and to shut him out there too. What was second? Was Wisconsin or Penn State, Notre Dame?
Well, maybe Wisconsin because they threw beer cans at you and stuff like that. But
all right.
Northwestern, the stadium wasn't. Purdue was, but I'd say I would say Michigan State second.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, best fight song. And let's do this. We already know the best fight song is yours. That's going to go. So, excluding yours, what's your favorite fight song from another team that you have to admit is really good? Song?
I thought there was only one.
There's actually a couple. There's 2 or 3 others.
I can't really recall them.
Really? Okay. All right. I get it. And there's one from Ohio that you can't even talk about. It doesn't even exist. Yeah.
Buckeye's a useless nut. You know
Okay, and then the final for me, did you prefer playing in the home blues in the maize, or did you like the white jerseys on the road?
Depended on the weather conditions. White when it's hot, blues I didn't when it's cold. But we never played in many hot games in the Big Ten since we're all in central United States. So,
Okay.
but nobody has a helmet like the Michigan helmet.
When you put that on for the first time, when you go in as a freshman and that's in your locker, and that's going to be yours for the next couple of years, what was that like for you?
Well, here's what Bo always did is that even though we weren't eligible to play as freshmen, the very first game he let all the freshmen dress, and we all got to run because the tunnel starts up high and it goes down into the lower. So he let us run onto the field, before the game with the MGO blue banner up there. You get to jump up and go ahead and touch it, which is tradition. It's one of the most exciting things that's ever happened to me as a football player. And any freshman will always remember the first time they run on the field and get to jump up and tap that MGO blue banner, and then fans go nuts. You knew when that happened, you knew you made the right decision to come to Michigan.
That's it.
Now, did you ever hit your head like at Notre Dame? Did you hit your noggin on any of the locker rooms?
When you're tall, you learn how to duck.
There you go.
Yeah.
You got to adjust quick.
So playing in front of 107,000 for every home game. When you go on the road, like you mentioned, going to Northwestern, there's only 40 or 50 there. But you had 90-something at Ohio State. I mean, the Rose Bowl, you went out there, there's 101. Everything falls short of what you were used to, and getting the facilities and everything else that compares to what's going on in Ann Arbor.
Well, back in Ann Arbor, Harper, back then we didn't have an indoor facility, so spring ball was always interesting because there's 4 feet of snow, piled up next to the practice field.
Yeah. And you played on that horrible turf back in the days too, also.
Turf, oh yeah, that stuff was awful. It was like playing on concrete. The field in Columbus was actually worse than ours. It was, it actually had a peak in the middle like this, so when it rained, it would go ahead in the. I think theirs was really astroturf, and it's short little pieces of grass that actually would lay down.
It was bent, yeah.
You had to be careful because if you were running into it one way, you had traction. The other way, it got slippery.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the turf back in those days. And you mentioned Wisconsin. Purdue had grass back then,
Bob
right?
Blackman told me I never played Big Ten football. I always played a little much harder against them. He was the head coach for Illinois.
Yeah. Well, if anyone wanted to go to Michigan, what would you tell them about their decision? Like you just mentioned a moment ago, as soon as you touch that banner, and everybody has the honor now of being able to do that, and wearing the helmet and all the other things, what do you say when it comes time to go? You're not making a bad decision at all if you go there. From an academic, from an athletic, just from a school standpoint, it met all of your needs. How does it do it for others?
If you want to belong to an exclusive fraternity, different than any other fraternity that's available to you, you pick Michigan. It's a very unique place. And once you're a Michigan Wolverine, you're always a Michigan Wolverine. And I don't watch much football now. I watch the Falcons and I watch the Bears because I grew up in Chicago. I was always a Bear fan. But I watch Michigan football every Saturday. I don't watch any other college football other than Michigan football.
Man, that's diehard right there. That's what we love here. That's what we love here on the show is that loyalty, like you said. And my final question for you, Mike, is just how would you describe your overall experience at Michigan as a player as well as a student out there being on campus, just in a few words?
It was great. I have no complaints. It was awesome. We used to go to the hockey games in Michigan because Donnie Dufek, one of our players, was also a hockey player. We'd go to the basketball games. It was great environment. And I'm a Midwesterner, so there wasn't any adjustment period for me. But I have zero regrets, and some of the fondest memories I have right now are associated with those 4 years I was there.
Mr. Kenn, I first like to say thank you for coming on 100 Yards of Football today. My final question to you today is, I was reading some information about you and doing my background check. I know your father played a big role in you going to Michigan. They in the show today just talk about your father and how he played a role in your career.
You know, my dad was a very unique man, never graduated from high school, and raised, 4 kids, ended up being a field superintendent to a company that grew into the largest commercial heating, ventilating, and air conditioning company in the Chicago area. He was a journeyman. He was the field superintendent. He had 200 men in the field that reported to him. He set a perfect example on how you should raise your children and what kind of people or persons you wanted that you should be. And I got 2 brothers and I got a sister. My dad died prematurely at 67 in the last year of my NFL career. So Leo will always be missed. He was a great man.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Logan?
Yes, sir. And Mike, we appreciate you very much for coming on the show here today, sharing your strong words. And we have a special song we want to play for you here as we end out the show. And thank you for your time here. By a little band, Led Zeppelin, by way of Mr. Turner. I know you were happy for this one. And Mike, we appreciate you coming on the show, talking about your career at Michigan, talking about some football history. It's been an absolute pleasure. Mike Kenn coming on the show. Of course, the great Harper, LeBel, and of course, Mr. Football himself, Vincent Turner. I've been your host and producer, Logan Landers. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in here today, live on Facebook and YouTube. And until next time, we'll talk to you again on another live episode. We'll see you later.